And welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Thompson, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, football was back. How we doing?
Yeah, more importantly, you're back.
Yeah,
You came back to me.
I did.
Yeah, the good evening. You lean into it. That's the trick. You're like, good evening. I got to learn that for next time I'm on without you. But you were missed, man.
I thought you did pretty well. I thought
Thanks.
it was a good evening.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, it's great to have football back. Dude, it didn't. Oh, I don't want to say it snuck up on me because I had it circled on my calendar, but I do feel like this year was a little bit less of that grind in between the draft and this time of year. It was still the same amount of distance, but I guess it just must be this hype of having a good football team got me that maybe it shrunk that a little bit for me, but I feel like it came a little bit quicker this year, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I feel the same. It didn't have some of the same slog to it, and I think it's for good reason that there were people bringing up different topics about the team and people talking about the Bills and genuine excitement, looking forward to it, not kind of the previous anxiety-laden things. So, tonight's show is brought to you by our sponsors over at Underdog Fantasy. Make sure you download the Underdog Fantasy app and use the promo code Cover1. You get 25 free bucks. I've been messing around all kinds of ways doing it and having a lot of fun with it. We've been messing with it on the Cover One Fantasy Show and a bunch of different people. So if you're into it, take a look at it. As we get into the season, we're going to be doing a lot of fun stuff with the player prop parlays, and I think that's going to be a really fun thing. So I know that's a piece you might get into.
Yeah, I'll be there for it. I'm still not there in the season yet, but I'm coming soon here. Once with preseason games start kind of rolling around, and I'm gonna have to lean on you guys and watch some of these fantasy episodes because I do have a draft here coming up in 3 or 4 weeks. So I haven't done any fantasy homework, so I'm gonna have to go back and watch some of the episodes and get caught up here.
We got you, and they are evergreen content. Please, everyone, check them out. So obviously tonight is going to be our final episode of the position previews. We're going to do quarterbacks and specialists, but we did have some actual news. Today's Rob Quinn. Don't worry, we're going to get into Davis Webb season. Don't worry. So once we get going, we figured that we didn't know how much news there would be today, but we actually had 4 training camp pressers and some reporting on the first training camp practice. So we'll start with some of those. The first one right off the bat was Brandon Beane. And
love that guy.
It's awesome to have a leader like that. He went through so much. Even some little things, the way that he ended the presser with, somebody that everybody gives a hard time to Vic at this point, but just a really classy gesture, to give something on behalf of the team. But, had some good information, and I, had a couple things. We found out that both Ike Bacher and Deion Dawkins actually tested positive for COVID, so obviously need to monitor where that is. Announced that 80% of the team has received the vaccine and 100% of the staff and coaches. Jerry Hughes is on the NFI list with what he described as not a big deal calf injury, probably just some veteran maintenance kind of things. But I thought it was some interesting information and great to see the leader up there, kicking things off.
Yeah, I love Brandon Beane's press conferences. Obviously, we've talked about it a lot. I think there's a lot of people chalk a lot of things up to coach speak or GM speak, but I think he tries to be as honest as you can be as a GM in these things, and in respecting the media guys. Yes. I think I give those guys in the media and in the beat a tough time, but they do have a job to do, and they have to ask some of these questions to get something out of these guys. And I think both he and Sean McDermott do a good job of trying to respect it, but still, maintain that they want to keep some edge and not give everything away. So it's a fine act and a balancing act, but the GMs that the Bills have had through the drought, fumbling through press conferences, no class, no tact, nice guys, but not as good with the media and that back and forth that it takes in building those relationships. And they've proven that stuff's really important to them and how they address the media and those types of relationships. And you see it sort of play out with the end of the press conferencing with Vic, that type of small gestures to those guys, I think it means a lot in that relationship because it does go both ways.
Yeah, and I thought that it was good to see that kind of structure. Talked about the fact that he didn't think that the social media elements that came out were a distraction to the team. Talked about how happy everyone was there to be back together,
Shocking.
seeing Star back. Yeah, and we'll get into it a little bit more when we do the quarterback discussions. But he touched on a little bit of where they're at on the Josh Allen deal and extension. So we'll talk about that when we get into the quarterback pieces. Then it went into Sean McDermott's presser, and again, exactly what you would expect. Very stoic, already starting with some of the coach speak and some of his go-to phrases. I love the approach that last year doesn't matter. 13 wins in the regular season last year doesn't matter. Defending division champ doesn't matter. You have to start over. That climb starts at the bottom again. Even though some of those can come off as cliches, they're real, and that's the way you need to approach it. And I love the way that he handled, similar to the way that he handled the previous pressers, talking about, he doesn't hide the fact of his preferences on the vaccine, but talked about the level to respect everyone there, that it's not going to be an issue, that they're ready to work together as a family and as a team. And I thought he handled it incredibly well.
Yeah, I thought, obviously to the point of cliches and stuff, I agree they are cliches and it is a little bit coach speak, but those things exist because they're true, right? Like
Correct.
A cliche stands the test of time because that always rears true. And Sean McDermott's experienced this of having a team reach the pinnacle, go to the Super Bowl and not be able to get back to that spot with his team in Carolina. They were never really able to replicate that success they had in that Super Bowl run with Cam Newton. It's hard, and he's experienced that more than once. They've had playoff teams in Philly. They had playoff teams in Carolina, and to continue to maintain that success. We talk about it a lot here, and I talked about it with Anthony Prohaska the other day when we were talking about, what is Bill's records and the expectations for the season. Their progress isn't always linear, and that while we expect that this Bills team, and Vegas is expecting this Bills team to be one of the teams that competes for the Super Bowl, it's not necessarily going to be, hey, they got to the AFC Championship game again, so that's where they're going to get to and maybe forward. That it's a hard climb, and you added another game this season, and teams around you got better. So I'm glad that the message is, and if he's saying this in the media, he's pounding it to these guys every single day, that this is a new team. This is a new season. You're not going to just come back and have the same exact success you had in 2020. And people are going to get sick of hearing it, but I think it's an important message, especially early to start this season, because it's a long grind. So I'm glad that he is kind of pounding the table on that stuff. And then to the respect of the locker room, I think that was way overblown by people, both fans and media. I saw people saying like, oh, how mad is Sean McDermott right now? And I think he has a good job of balancing that all these players have personalities. Some of them are passionate. They're not always going to be in line with exactly what you want them to be doing at all times, but that he believes in the leadership council he talks all about. We saw Matt Perino and Ryan Talbot had Patrick DeMarco on the other night, and Patrick DeMarco was talking about what a leader Cole Beasley was and what he's like in that locker room, and the relationship with Jerry Hughes and Cole Beasley, and that exchange between them was really nothing. And I think we kind of see it as, hey, they're fighting on Twitter and it must be real and it must be bad. And I don't think that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have any concerns about their locker room. They've intentionally put a lot of emphasis on leadership for the last 4 years and building that locker room and building that culture. And this is why, when you have moments like this, that the outside noise doesn't matter. It's what you've already established inside. And so I wasn't worried about it, but now it's nice to hear your leadership in Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, and then some of the players all come out and share the same message today.
Yeah, I thought it carried over in the next presser. Josh Allen came up, said all the right things, said that he was there to support his teammates and they were going to be respectful. And I think brought some important kind of context to the discussion that, do you guys realize how many things we argue and debate about in the locker room all the time? Yeah. And that we're still brothers and love each other and handle, like, they have, nasty, loud arguments about crazy, silly, insignificant things, let alone things they take seriously and are passionate about. So I think that people underestimate the way that those things get approached. So I like the way that Josh talked about it. He was really excited about, Emmanuel Sanders. It heard some really good things there. Talking about the work that he's put in and the offseason work he did with Jordan Palmer and being ready to step in here quickly. Really talked a lot about the how excited he was to have the fans back and how they're already practicing for that. I know some people have been worried about, kind of the adrenaline and the sugar high Josh, and is that something we're going to have to worry about as he gets used to it? I like the fact that he's already thinking about that day one, that they're already pumping in crowd noise at every practice, getting ready for that. I think that's a smart way to approach it so that you don't lose some of that, some of the potential for the calm and the, collected approach that he had last year. I think that was smart about it. So I thought Josh came off well in his presser also.
Yeah, I am still worried about the fans, and he touched on how loud KC was without full capacity, and that being deafening. I still have concern, and I don't know that you can replicate it and say that I've been to a lot of events, and it's hard to replicate like the passion when the Ralph is rocking. That's a very unique place. So I am still worried about that. The thing that I like hearing the most from Josh is that chip is still very much on your shoulder. Talking about he's still not far removed from junior college, and even the praise that he's getting, like he's still got this chip on his shoulder. And the best athletes historically have that. Like even I'm not comparing him to Jordan, but the guys that are wired in that way, like if you watch The Last Dance, Jordan just making stuff up that to keep the chip on his shoulder, like this person offended me, and even though they didn't, I think Josh has a little bit of that in him, that no matter how much success he gets in this league, he'll find some way to maintain that chip on his shoulder because he knows that pushes that competitive edge for him. And as long as he remains the crazy competitor he is, that's what fuels him to become great. That's what fuels him to work the way he does in the offseason. So he still very much got that. I wasn't anticipating that went away after one season. So I'm really excited, though, that he's still exactly who we thought he was. He's Josh Allen. He's super competitive, and he's ready to go out and take that next step forward. So I was super excited. And we heard that he had a really nice practice, so right back to where he left off. So very happy, excited to see what the rest of this training camp provides. It was nice to get a glimpse of everybody today.
Oh yeah. And the final presser was the one maybe I was the most anxious about, was Cole Beasley. And I thought he handled himself really well. He had a prepared statement at the beginning. I've been open about my approach to things, and I don't particularly agree with him on this topic, but I love the way that he handled it. I thought that he came out, he gave a statement, explained how he was stepping up for younger players who were nervous and scared, and that, if they got cut, they were afraid their dream would be over and they'd never be able to get back into the NFL because of their hesitancy in getting vaccinated. And I think the way that he approached that was very mature. He showed that he talked about the fact that, hey, people blew up the thing between him and Jerry Hughes, and that they were on the phone talking right afterwards and handling that and putting it aside, and that he was super excited to be back there with his brothers, with his family, and then talked about football. And that was really all I wanted, was to get the attention back on the team and focus back on the direction going forward, and that's exactly what he did today. And I thought he kind of diffused the situation really well, and handled it as well as you could ask. So I was really impressed with the way that he came off. Even if I don't particularly feel the same way he does, that's exactly how things like this should be. You should be able to have adults have different opinions and be able to move forward with it. So I was pleased with the way that he came off and the way he handled it.
Yeah, I wished he would have come up with some type of statement sooner than continuing to rattle through disjointed tweets and things that didn't make total sense to everybody. There's still some stuff in that statement that, again, I think I don't agree with. I don't like the way he presented it, but I do like that he clearly worked, with the Bills PR, talked to the Bills PR that this was something that he wanted to do. I'm sure they read that message ahead of time and were happy and said, yes, go ahead and make that message clear, and let's put this behind us. I'm glad that he's made the commitment to not talk about this anymore and move ahead with football. Again, if you haven't listened to it, the Shout podcast with Matt Perino and Ryan Talbot, they had Patrick DeMarco on, who was part of that leadership council that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott had brought into this team, was a leader, a captain on that team, talked about Cole Beasley in the locker room, and talked about relationships with guys like Jerry Hughes. And he had no concerns about the person that Cole Beasley is and what he means to this team. And it shows up all over the film. And that's why my disagreements with him, I totally disagree with the stance that he has on this stuff. But I was able to look past that because I see I don't think that he's going to be an issue. I see how he puts it out on the field. You see him diving into the end zone head first, getting shots from everybody, playing on a broken leg. Like, this guy puts it all out on the line. And in the NFL and in sports in general, those are the things that matter the most, that
100%.
you go to war with these guys. Richie Incognito was a lightning rod of a guy who probably in the locker room had opinions that didn't jive with a lot of the guys that were his teammates. But you heard a guy like Lorenzo Alexander come out years ago and say, hey, I didn't like this guy at all when I, playing against him. Like, this guy, he was what you hear about. But now that I've been with him, I'll go to war with this guy any day of the week. Yeah. And that's what's important in an NFL locker room. And so for him to come out and kind of get that off his chest and get over with, there was some maturity to it. I think, I think his point about the NFL and the NFLPA and the pressure that it puts on people that aren't guaranteed or don't have the money yet that have that type of security, and that it is a really tight window. We talked about it a lot last year with the undrafted free agents and the guys trying out for rosters with that weird COVID year. Like, it's a short window. If you miss one training camp, that's it. That could be a wrap. And you're trying out for CFL teams for the rest of your career. So it's a really small window. So a lot of those guys kind of get left in the wake of these big discussions and these big, like, everyone just thinks of the starters on teams and how it affects them, but it really affects the guys at the bottom who either don't have a say or feel pressure. So I'm glad that he's at least given those people a voice, but now that he's given them a voice and put those concerns out there, let's focus on that 2021 Super Bowl championship. And it seems like that is the case, and we're ready to move on.
My man Greg Cash, good follow on Twitter, I think makes a good point here that the way they've approached it now, they're fully focused there, and the only thing that would come up and cause any concerns is if there was an actual whatever the league deems as an outbreak or how they approach it. Right. So I'm glad to see
which
that
we still don't know. The league is in flux of those things. We don't know.
Intentionally vague. It was not an accident that was vague. And I will say, Chris asked this question. Maybe this is known, but is Josh Allen vaccinated? He didn't wear a mask in the presser today. As far as I'm aware, and my interpretation of the rules and what you saw Cole Beasley, I think it is actually very fair to assume Josh Allen is vaccinated. The team would not have let him be up there without a mask on. That would have been a violation of the protocol. If you were not vaccinated, you couldn't be there without a mask. So that is a very fair dot to connect. We don't know that, but as far as my understanding is, that was the reason Cole Beasley had to have the mask on. I've read it in the rules and the regulations they're rolled out. That is my understanding, that Josh was not there with the mask on. That means he is vaccinated, but we don't know that. That's just connecting dots.
Yeah, I'm not going to speculate. I mean, that we also know that Cole Beasley likely isn't, and he and Josh were hugging unmasked in the video inside the building. So I don't know what. I think there's a lot of vagueness in the league right now and unknowns around the league. So Josh said he isn't going to tell, and so until he tells me, I'm not going to guess.
Yeah. Anything else from the pressers today? There's a couple things. We saw some really good reports on practice. One, no one got hurt.
Yeah.
Good.
That's my worst
first day. It's the number one thing is the takeaway. Nobody got hurt today.
Yeah.
Good reports that Josh looked great and Mitch Trubisky looked great, so that'll lead into some of our discussions later on the quarterbacks. Some nice highlights of kind of throwing things around, but it was nice to have things back. There's not a lot you can take from line play. There's no pads on, there's no contact, but there were, you're getting into one-on-one drills, you're getting wide receivers versus cornerbacks, you're getting those 7-on-7 passing drills. Today was the first official day being back, and I'm really excited to see it. And for anyone who isn't aware, obviously the fans are available to go this Saturday. I'm going to be there, so hopefully I'll see some of you guys. Hit me up on Twitter if you're going to be there. I want to stop out and say hi to as many people as I can while I'm out there watching practice. So really looking forward to that. But any other takeaways you heard? I know I saw John Scott put out some stuff about Josh Allen looking elite and going there. Sal had some pieces on how good the 7-on-7 passing drills looked and a really good crisp start to things. So seemed like a very positive start to the camp.
Yeah, I have a tough time with the results of practice, especially at the beginning of it. I'm glad it's not the EJ Manuel practices that we would hear about in the past. So
over the courtesy tent.
Yeah, I'm glad things are going well, but it doesn't matter to me. I don't care if they're good at practice. But some of the things that stood out to me were more in the press conference side. Brandon Beane talking about Tywan Jones being an elite gunner in this league. I think that locks him up into a potential roster spot this year, which people have kind of, when we're playing these number games and we've talked a lot in this, positional breakdown preview of how many of these special teams, primarily only guys that are a running back only in name, are the Bills going to keep, and him kind of singling out Taiwan Jones as an elite person at that position. That might mean something tough for Matt Breida, and that goes to what you talked about with, hey, maybe you keep an Antonio Williams and you are able to maybe keep him on the practice squad as that kind of bring up back. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch going forward. I think him talking about Starlet Tulele was interesting to me, because just a couple months ago, there was a lot of panic among the Bills fan base because he's a big key piece to what they were missing on defense a year ago. And then him not showing up to the voluntary work, people got all pissed about that and worried. And Sean McDermott called him out, right?
Yeah, even had some sharp words.
Right, but I think they see they're past that. They're ready to move forward. They're ready with that. And then Cody Ford, I think Brandon Beane talking about we're going to see the Cody Ford we drafted. I don't know how much that is necessarily, whether or not he believes that. I think that he wants
manifesting it.
He's manifesting it, sure. But I think it's more of a putting out the pressure publicly to him that now's the time. Now's the time. We got to have a clean slate here and move forward, and you've got to earn this starting job and be the guy we drafted you to be. I think that was more of a call to action for Cody Ford. So those are some of the things that stood out to me, and all things I'm excited for, because if Cody Ford becomes the guy they drafted him to be, that eliminates a lot of the concern I have with one of the very few weak spots on this team.
Yeah, that's pure gravy. If we get to the point where he's actually playing like a top 40 overall pick, that's elite, kind of production that we're looking for. So anything in the realm of starting caliber would be a great step forward.
Absolutely.
And, there's been enough comments from Brandon Beane, and that, it's hard for me to disconnect the amount of respect I have for Brandon Beane and his football intellect and the way that he's approached and how outwardly he speaks positively to Cody Ford. And there's obviously some confirmation bias in there. He wants his draft pick to be proven right. Sure. But he has plenty of opportunity that he could have distanced himself from that or kind of kept more reserved in his comments. That I'm interested to see, is there reason that he's speaking so positively about it? So without further ado, let's dive right into the topics for tonight. We'll obviously start with the quarterbacks, and that starts with Josh Allen. We're going to talk about some of the other guys, but it's, for Mike Sando does the quarterback tiers discussion, and he talks to 50 different high-level people within the league, offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, coaches, GMs, executives, 50 different, voices in the league, and they do a voting tier on every single quarterback. Tier 1 meaning you are the reason your team wins. You can pull your team to a championship. Tier 2 being the team can win with you, and on occasion you will be the reason they win. Tier 3 being you won't be the reason they lose, and then Tier 4, beyond there. Josh Allen was the top quarterback in Tier 2. They had him 6th overall, and he had a lot of votes in Tier 1, 20 votes in Tier 1, 30 votes in Tier 2, no votes below there, and all the comments were, he was Tier 1 last year, I just want to see it again. Mm-hmm. And that was the entire approach. And honestly, we're good friends with our friend Bruce Nolan over the Bruce Exclusive. I think he's very much in that boat of, hey, I'm super excited. I'm really glad to be wrong about Josh Allen, but I'd still like to see it one more time before we give him $400 million. And I thought that was kind of healthy perspective from people around the league, for Bills fans, myself included, who are ready to sign that check. I'm ready to give him that contract tomorrow. I'd still be fine if they give him that contract tomorrow.
Yeah.
But that I think it's okay for some people to say, last year was awesome, but I still want to see it one more time. And I think that's okay to have that perspective.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm totally ready to give him the check for a number of reasons. I think he's done enough to prove that he can be a guy that you build a franchise around. I don't know that he's ever going to be, I don't know if he's going to take that next step and be able to pull this team to a Super Bowl. I think I've seen flashes. I think we saw last year that he has that ability, and I agree that we want to see it more consistently, but he's the closest thing that Buffalo's had to the total package of a franchise elite NFL superstar. He says all the right things. He does all the right things. He's great in the community. The community loves him. He puts it all out online. He's built for Buffalo. So all those things aside, he's an asset. He's outside of Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, he's the best asset the Pagulas have ever had in their owning sports entities. And so for those reasons alone, whether or not that he has success, I would love to see him just get locked up, because I think he's good for Buffalo. I think he's good for the city. I think he draws attention, real national attention to this team. And I think everything's lining up for him to have maybe not exact. There's not a lot of meat on the bone in terms of production that he can. There wasn't much more that he can produce.
5,000 total yards and 46 total touchdowns. It's hard to up that.
Yeah, and I think there could be a case for Josh Allen to have progression that isn't increased production. I think that he can have a progressive step forward this year if he limits the sacks, right? Limits some of the bad plays. So just get rid of some of that stuff.
Just to let you know, obviously in the chat they were asking, the other quarterbacks were Mahomes, Rodgers, Brady, Russ Wilson, and Deshaun Watson, and with the caveat of all the other off-field things. But the reason that they said, hey, I voted for Josh in Tier 1, but the reason I want to see a little bit more for it is, he took that 18-yard sack and fumbled the ball in the critical moment against the Colts, and if Cody Ford doesn't recover that, or Deion Dawkins or whoever, Darrell Williams maybe, doesn't recover that, maybe you're having a different discussion. Then you play Baltimore and you only put up 10 points offensively, and then you lose by 2 touchdowns to Kansas City. I'd like to see a little bit more. I want to see another step forward. I want to see more consistency. I think some of those are nitpicking a little bit in that I thought he
think if you look closely enough
better. Especially the first 2 playoff games. But that was some of the perspective of, hey, he deserved to be number 2 in the MVP. Last year he played as a Tier 1 guy. I just want to see a little bit more, and I want to see it in the playoffs more consistently.
If we're nitpicking, though, like Russell Wilson, I can nitpick
that
he belongs on the other side of Josh. And Watson has big-time production, but he does the same crap. I've seen him take 18-yard sacks and make some bad stuff, and he certainly
didn't lift that Houston team last year. They played terrible with him playing the whole year.
Yeah, and I think he's a really good quarterback, but if you're gonna analyze Josh in that way, I think you got to analyze those other 2 guys in that same way. But I think it's fair that he's right there.
That's the realm.
I don't think he's earned to be. I think last year I could have said, hey, he was there right step for step with Mahomes and Rodgers, but I think, when people do power rankings of quarterbacks and things like that, like you either look at the single season or you look at the whole big picture. And if you're looking at the whole big picture, he's not right there with Mahomes and Rodgers yet. If he puts together another type MVP type season, then sure, let's throw him in those conversations. But I do think he's probably more in that Russell Wilson area right now.
I agree. And I think, there's pieces that you need to be excited about with his focus, working on those in-breaking routes, working on the touch longer for the deeper passes. He worked on a lot with his footwork and his placement of resetting his feet. That seemed to be a big one that Jordan Palmer went through, and that missing some of those in-cutting routes and missing some of the deeper balls were because he would get his feet set really well, and it was working on a lot of the passes, but he needed to reset his feet before he made some of those other passes, and he worked on that, and they showed the drills. They showed the force plates that they use to measure, if you're having your heel planted. And that for anyone who didn't read it, there was a really good article more about Jordan Palmer's process, and a piece was Josh Allen, a piece was Joe Burrow, some of the other guys that Palmer works with, but they talked about that some of those early things about, hey, you need to be up on your toes, it's actually not right. You actually want your feet very flat and your heel in the ground to push off and to create the most force, and that pull that they used to drill all the time, pull your elbow down. It's like, no, that's actually terrible. You don't get your hip through, and do those things. So unteaching some of those things are the parts that Jordan Palmer works on, and I think we might see some of that one of their focuses, you heard Stefan Diggs talk about it later on, about the focus on more yards after the catch and being able to create more there. If Josh can get the timing on those in-breaking routes and you set up a Stefan Diggs and Emmanuel Sanders, guys like that who have that juice after they get the ball, maybe we get a little bit more there where it's not all on Josh in the air yards, because the Bills were phenomenal in air yards last year, but very, very below average in yards after the catch.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing before we move on, I want to touch on here. Lone Wolf talked about our offense was absolutely struggled in the playoffs. I agree. They did struggle. I also think there's a lot of context in there that's not just necessarily Josh struggled, right? Like those guys brought up that
his numbers were actually very good.
Yeah, he had pretty good games, but Stefan Diggs had a oblique tear, I think, or strain.
Correct.
Like that's a legitimate injury, and Cole Beasley's playing
literally on a broken leg.
Yeah, and didn't play. He struggled to get healthy to play. John Brown still also was not at 100% going.
Cole Beasley talked about that in his presser, that John was never right the whole second half of the year.
Yeah, did not get right. And we also, some of the guys along the offensive line were dinged up and banged up. I don't think Feliciano was right at any point throughout the year. And we saw that kind of rear its head in the playoffs. So some of that had some context into it's a long season. And while it appeared as though for the season, the Bills had pretty good health luck on the year, I think, some of those injuries kind of showed their heads at the wrong time. And the guys just played through it. It was still something that guys were out there playing, but that's not always a good you don't want your number one receiver with an oblique strain, a guy that goes up and gets the ball. So I think some of that had to do with bad luck. Getting hurt at the wrong time.
The reshuffled offensive line.
Yeah, so a lot of things kind of went against them a little bit there towards the end of the season. I think that more hurt the offense, and that's why I think we saw some of the struggles.
Yeah. So I obviously huge fans of Josh Allen. I'm super excited about the season this year. He's rightfully one of your top 3 or 4 favorites for MVP. I think that he's going to have, we talked about it before. I gave the example. What does it mean if Josh Allen has 4,400 total yards and 42 total touchdowns? That means he had 10% regression off of last year's numbers, and he still would have shattered every franchise record that the franchise had. So it's, I think he's going to have another really good statistical year. I do expect a little bit of a step back, but still phenomenal production, really, really strong offensive game, full command of the offense. And that, I think you said it really well before, Josh Allen can take a step forward without having better stats. He can be a better player without having improved stats. If our defense is a little bit better and we don't need a couple of the shootouts, all of a sudden that's some lesser yards that we don't need. Yeah. So there's some pieces like that.
If the Bills, this is something that Anthony Romeo brought up on our show, that he believed that the Bills wouldn't be playing their starters for the final 2 games of a 17-game season because they would have such a lead on the division and have playoffs locked down. If something like that happened, the only way, there's another way that he could shatter last year is if they have to play all 17 games and you add in an additional 300-yard game.
Yeah, if the Patriots bounce back and have a stronger season, you need to fight them down to the final week, or that they've talked a ton about wanting home field advantage, and if they have a shot, especially if they get a win over Kansas City early on and they can get that number 1 seed and the bye and home field advantage all the way through, Josh will have pedal to the floor all the way through, and then you might see some sky high numbers, and maybe it gets 5,000 passing yards. So heck if I know. Another pleasant surprise, and I saw this from Sal, I saw it again from John Scott, I saw it from Matthew Fairburn. Mitch Trubisky being a very pleasant surprise in that accurate passes, noticeably different in the approach for
pulling them up
where it is, and that tonight is our Uncle Jumbo spotlight player. Mitch Trubisky, the biscuit, is our spotlight player. Our friends over at Uncle Jumbo's, make sure you're checking them out. All their good stuff is available here. I have not gotten Bomb Pop yet. I'm going to get some when I'm in town on Saturday. Bring some of that Bomb Pop back with me. That just talking about how noticeable the athleticism is versus Matt Barkley, a little more zip on the ball, and that the biggest one is they don't need to change the playbook when Trubisky goes in. If something were to happen to Josh and Matt Barkley came in, they could only use like half the playbook. He can't do the rollouts. He can't do the play action. He can't do the deeper passes. Trubisky is not Josh Allen, but he is an athletic big guy. He can do the read option plays. He can sit there in shotgun and do read option with the, they use the kind of pistol formation with the tight end there. That they can do a lot of those fun formations and not have to do that. And that I think Mitch Trubisky is going to be a nice addition here. And apparently he's going to become best friends with Josh Allen.
Yeah, I think I agree that you can keep stuff the same a little bit. I think Brian Dable has done Josh Allen a service of setting some of those routes a little deeper, deep crossing routes, bread and butter for this team. And I don't know that. I think with Trubisky, if he comes in, I think you got to shorten up some of that stuff. He doesn't have the arm to put things deep. I think that's where he struggles a little bit, is getting the ball downfield. So while he could do some of the stuff in terms of athletic ability, he definitely doesn't have the type of arm to get the ball downfield, so that you might have to bring some of that playbook in a little bit and do some shallow crossing type stuff instead of that deep, long plays that Josh Allen can do. But this, I know a lot of Bears fans. My brother's a Bears fan. He's in the podcast world there. And I talk to a lot of these guys in DMs, and they're a little torn up because that team invested so much in Mr. Trubisky for him to be a bottom tier NFL starter / backup. But I think he is finally finding exactly the role for Mitch Trubisky for his NFL career, which is a fantastic role. He's going to make a lot of money in this league, and he might not have to play that much in making all this money, but it is to be the perfect backup to a elite quarterback in this league. There's not a lot of backups that are better. I think if there are, they're in a situation where they were drafted and there was a better quarterback ahead of them, but there's not a lot of guys that are going to come in if the starting quarterback gets hurt and can have the amount of reps that he has and time on task in the NFL and has played in playoff games and things like that, knows how to deal with the media. He was the face of a franchise in one of the largest cities in the NFL. It's a very difficult media and city to be a part of. So he checks a lot of boxes that you're looking for in a backup. He's not going to cause any problems for Josh Allen. He's not pushing Josh Allen in any way. He's not pushing to become the starter.
Josh talked about how his experience brought something already to the room.
Absolutely.
And that he's able to reference some of those situations.
And this was something that we talked about a couple years back with Matt Barkley being a perfect situation for Josh Allen. Was he wasn't pushing. He was purely support for Josh Allen during the critical years, which were young, developing, still struggling as a quarterback in the NFL years. Now you bring in a guy that, if he was that young, developing, still struggling quarterback, that might be a little bit pressure, former top pick. But now that Josh has proven that he can be MVP caliber in this league, Mitch Trubisky's not a threat to that starting position. And he is just a perfect setup that can also come in if need be for a couple weeks or whatever while Josh gets better, if God forbid something happens. And I think that you can win games with a guy like Mitch Trubisky. He reminds me of the sort of the Tyrod Taylors of the world. And my argument for a Tyrod Taylor at the time was, maybe he's not winning games, but I think that there's a formula with guys like this in the NFL that you can win games with them. And it's not ideal, but you can do it. And that's all you're looking for out of a backup quarterback. And so I think he has the potential, I don't know that it's here in Buffalo after this year, but I think Mitch Trubisky is going to be a guy that fills that sort of Tyrod Taylor role where he's a bridge for certain teams where they can rely on him to start for a year while they're grooming a guy behind him, or he's the perfect Chase Daniel type backup to continue to be a backup in the NFL. It's a role that is sort of embarrassingly weak in the NFL in terms of depth at backup quarterback, considering it's the most important position in all of football.
Case Keenum, Andy Dalton.
It's terrible. Yeah, he's right in that range, right? And so I'm glad that the Bills got him. I think that this is the path going forward for the Bills throughout Josh Allen's career, is to find these Mitch Trubiskys that fall out of favor somewhere else, and you give them a couple million to come to a place that has a lot of primetime games, that has a good roster, and they're hoping that they get one or two opportunities to go out and earn their next contract. So this is a great setup for both sides.
Yeah, and you look at one, he just left Chicago, so he wasn't going to get this spot there, but he's the perfect spot for that pairing with Justin Fields. If New England didn't have Cam, he would have been a perfect pairing with Mac Jones. If San Francisco didn't have Jimmy G, he would have been a perfect pairing with Trey Lance.
He's right in line with those guys.
That's the kind of guy that you put in that spot. And a lot of fans in the chat asking, what do I think the record would be with Mitch this year if Josh was out for the whole year? I think they'd be an 8 or 9 win team. I think that there's a lot of talent here, and that it would be, probably not terribly different than some of those Bears teams that made the playoffs and had
was gonna say
decent
that
teams. And
they had a Bears team that was like a muffed field goal away from
yeah,
advancing to the championship game. I
yes,
thought that one year.
winning,
So
winning 2 playoff games.
yeah, and they won what 12, 13 games that year in a 16
Yeah, 12-4,
game
I think
season?
12-4.
So I think if I was going to answer that, I want to see the defense
Yeah,
first
correct.
of the Bills.
Somebody brought that up. If we see a step forward from the previous defense, that you could even see a 10th, 10 wins, that kind of thing. Adam bringing that up. But yeah, I think that's the exact kind of player you want. Obviously, God forbid we lose Josh for any period of time, but his style of play, it's not crazy to think we could have a 3 or 4 game stretch where we might need to have somebody step in. This is the kind of guy that could easily come in and go 2-2, 3-1 in the right stretch and keep the ship afloat. And that's what you want from a backup. And also a couple people bringing up that, if they get into that spot, he could be some comp pick bingo. You get, if he goes and gets Tyrod Taylor got a $12 million deal from the Texans. Ryan Fitzpatrick got that kind of money. If all of a sudden
Andy
somebody
Dalton in
falls
Chicago
out of favor, and he gets a $10 or $12 million deal, that's a free 4th round pick. I'd love to see something like that next year, where the Bills are again going to be in a spot where you can't sign a lot of people. So get us some comp picks. I'd certainly be open to that. Behind Mitchell Trubisky, we obviously have the battle for QB3 and the battle for will there be a QB3 is Davis Webb versus Jake Fromm. Didn't hear much of anything today from either of them. I think they were out there, chucking it around. Obviously, Matt Perino did a great story on how impactful Davis Webb is as a pseudo quarterback coach, and how, like, when they did that get together last year in the offseason, he ran the scheme for the workout and is, kind of has seen his calling as a coach in the future. People forget he's not that old. He was a 3rd round pick just a couple years ago. And is, I think, 26, maybe turning 27. But obviously is more of a coach on the field. A piece of me wonders, is that more valuable in the quarterback room as a QB3 on the practice squad than needing to worry about, can we bring back Jake Fromm? Do we need to keep him on the active roster? With how deep this offensive line group, defensive line group, secondary, wide receiver group is, I'd love to go into this year with just 2 quarterbacks. That's why you get a veteran, solid, trustworthy backup like Mitch Trubisky. If I had to guess today, I'd put my money on Davis Webb being QB3 on the practice squad and us wishing Jake Fromm all the best.
Sure. Yeah, I have no attachment to Jake Fromm, so he's good to go. That's fine, unless he really shows that he
shows out and
has
trade him at cut down day.
Sure, but there is a scenario where Fromm has a good enough camp where you say, hey, there might be something here that he could be a Trubisky type guy.
He could be Trubisky
forward,
next year.
We don't have to go grab somebody next year and pay him because we already have this guy under cheap contract control. We can have our Mitch Trubisky in-house moving forward under control for a few more years. So there's a scenario. I've seen a lot on Twitter of people saying that Davis Webb would retire and become a coach, which would be silly to take less money to work harder.
He'd get paid more as a practice squad player than as an offensive. He would start out as a quality control coach.
Right.
We already have an assistant quarterback. Shea Tierney is already the assistant quarterback coach.
Yes.
So the quality control coach,
bottom of the totem pole in NFL.
The practice squad players, if you're on the roster all off season and all during the game, that's over $100,000 in how you add up each
treatments,
week.
Free treatments. You get.
I got bad news for you. Quality control coaches don't make $100,000.
No, and they work like 90 hours a week. It's not fun. It's not good work. You're doing all the heavy lifting in terms of labor that goes into coaching. I think people think like scouts and coaches are just like it's a regular 40-hour-a-week job of just doing football all the time. It's terrible work. It's a grind. The guys that do it are super dedicated.
You're banking on the fact that eventually you're going to become a coordinator or a head coach or a GM, and that'll pay off someday.
Yeah, these are the same conversations people were having about Derek Anderson a few years ago. Like, well, why doesn't he just retire and be a coach? Like, why would he take less money to work more? Nobody would you do it? Like, really, tweet that to yourself. Like, would you take less money to do more? It doesn't make sense. So, I agree that having him in the locker room is cool. I'm at the point though with Josh where I don't it's good. The more people around him that make him feel comfortable and that he can bounce off of, the better. I don't need Davis Webb there though. Like honestly, like I'm glad that he's there and that he is helpful to Josh. I don't need it. You do have a lot of people in place. He's best friends with Brian Dable. He was talking about how Mitch Trubisky's that guy for him in a lot of ways here. You have Shea Tierney. You have Dorsey. You have Ken Dorsey here. So there's a lot around Josh where I'm okay. He has Jordan Palmer on speed dial anytime he needs to talk to him. So he's got stability and the right structure around him where if Davis Webb's here, fantastic. That's cool on the practice squad. If he's not here, we're not missing a beat at this point. I think Josh is past that point in his career where he needs to be coddled or held like he did maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah. And I think, if you want to tell me a story that Davis Webb is the third string quarterback this year on the practice squad, plays that out again, and then, next year you get Brian Dable as a head coach somewhere and Ken Dorsey takes over the offensive coordinator, Shea Tierney becomes the quarterback coach, and the opening for assistant quarterback coach is available, and that it's another year into this, and Davis Webb sees that as an opportunity to officially kick into that gear of his career. Maybe there's a path for that in the coming years here. It's not right now. And as long as Davis Webb is able to stay on a practice squad and not an active NFL roster, God bless him. I would string that out as long as I possibly could. And I'm a little curious to see him play in the preseason. I'm excited to see him get a rep or two.
I didn't hate him coming out in the draft.
Yeah, he's never thrown an NFL pass in a regular season game. All he's ever had is preseason reps. So I'm kind of excited to see what he can do here. So we'll see where that goes. But
how much is it? One, he's not working nearly as hard as you would if you were a coach for Anderson. And golfing. I think he probably has an NFL pension. I think he probably played long enough to get an NFL. So he's probably still making more than the bottom tier coaches with his NFL pension.
He is doing just fine. Yeah. And you got to remember, he had starting NFL quarterback money at one point. So that after that Brown season, he went to the Pro Bowl.
He was like a star in Cleveland.
He went to the Pro Bowl with the Browns. If you went to a Pro Bowl as an NFL quarterback, you're doing fine financially.
Probably.
Someone overpaid you at some point.
Yep.
So, that wraps up the quarterback room. I won't be upset if they keep a third quarterback. I'm kind of hoping they don't. We have so much depth at other positions.
It's got to be a practice squad guy.
Yeah, you go out to get a safe, rock-solid backup like Mitch Trubisky so that you don't need to carry three quarterbacks. And if Jake Fromm lights it up in the preseason, I think our man Cliff is spot on. I see him as an A.J. McCarron. Trade him to John Gruden for a 5th round pick. Sounds great. Someone will overpay for a quarterback at all times. I hope that's what we find. I hope he plays great and makes it a difficult decision and as a cut down day trade, and we go into the season with Davis Webb on the practice squad and Mitch Trubisky is our backup to our franchise quarterback Josh Allen.
Yeah, I think the likely path, unfortunately for Fromm, is probably doesn't get a ton of burn this summer with only 3 preseason games, and they're not going to keep him on the roster, and he clears waivers and is just a practice squad player somewhere else.
Yeah. Our final topic for the night is maybe the easiest one we've done all warm up to camp. We've talked every single time
Josh.
about, we just talked about roster spot battles and who's going to make the team and who's going to be practice squad. For the first time in my adult memory, the Buffalo Bills do not have any competition at any specialist spot. They do not have a backup long snapper. They do not have a backup punter. They do not have a backup kicker. They have Tyler Bass, Matt Hawk, and Reed Ferguson, and they're the specialists. And that's
there had to be a stretch during that, like Mormon, Lindell. Like there was some drought years where there's probably specialists.
Yeah, maybe
locked out.
Yeah,
because that was all we were good at for like 4 or 5 years.
Garrison Sanborn.
Probably
was he? Yeah,
he was there for a while.
I'm trying to remember who the long snapper was during that stretch.
Yeah, and he was there for a while. Like special teams was the highlight. The Bills.
Yeah, Mormon was. Yeah, Mormon. Yeah, and honestly, Ryan Lindell was pretty good.
He was pretty good kicker.
He was pretty good. So yeah, maybe there was a year there where there wasn't a competition, but it really speaks to their confidence. Obviously, Tyler Bass was great. He broke the rookie scoring record last year. had a rough start, and you rightfully gave me some some crap about some of the misses early, but then was, I mean, just lights out the rest of the season. That Seattle game with 4 50-plus yard field goals, he had some really clutch kicks down the stretch, was looking really good. Obviously, we still need to see what we have in Matt Hawk, and is this, pinpoint accuracy and pinning teams within the 20? Does he have that skill set?
It does translate to Buffalo weather.
Correct.
We hear about that a lot.
Can he do it in the wind? Can he avoid some of the shanks and things like that? Obviously, Reed Ferguson is exactly what you want in a long snapper. You never need to think about it. You never need to worry. I'm never concerned about a ball going over a kicker's head or the snapper's head, the holder's head. I'm just never concerned with it. He does what he needs to do. You see him down there on punt coverage sometimes making a tackle. Mm-hmm. He isn't afraid to put his nose down in there.
And he came up with Grills Mafia. So
yes, and a gift to everyone in Grills Mafia, just a fantastic hashtag. The only one that really comes into play, if we want to count it, is the return job, or some of the gunners. So, the 3 main specialists are there. You heard Brandon Beane talk about Taiwan Jones as an elite gunner today. Our man Joe Marino said, hey, lock that one up as a roster lock if he's calling him an elite gunner.
I think Saren is too. I think that our buddy Merck on Twitter said that he believes that between Jones and Neal, that's a top 5 duo of gunners in the league, which DVOA says that's probably accurate.
So the final one really is this return job. And you're talking, is it going to be, I think the top tier is Isaiah McKenzie versus Marcus Stevenson. I think maybe Brandon Powell can make his name known. Maybe Matt Breida puts his hat in the ring for kick return. Maybe Christian Wade tries to make a name for himself. I think it's pretty much Isaiah McKenzie
Jones
versus
could be
Marcus.
In that.
He has an all-pro kick return season under his belt. He was not only a kick returner, he was an all-pro kick returner at one point. So certainly could throw his hat in the ring as well. And that's a nice, I could actually envision him being the Micah Hyde of kick return. Like that, hey, if something happens, say if Marcus Stevenson wins the job and then he gets dinged up during the game, Taiwan Jones would be the guy that would go back for the kick return, and he's that Micah Hyde. Micah Hyde is the fair catcher on the punt if we have an injury to the punt returner. As of right now, I have no real way to hedge the competition. I'm gonna guess based on the draft investment that Marcus Stevenson has a 51-49 head start on Isaiah McKenzie, but McKenzie's the last one to do it, so that's the real only job here amongst the specialists that's even open for discussion.
Yeah, this whole conversation, specialist, I never have needed to have the best in the NFL, right? All I want out of this unit is consistency. That's what matters the most to me. Is don't be the problem in the post game show where we're talking about you're the reason this team lost. And I kind of had some conversations with people in terms of Isaiah McKenzie because I've put out there that I think he's on the outside looking in right now going into camp. I think the draft capital in Stevenson and then bringing in a guy like Powell to compete for that job spoke volumes of the lack of confidence that they have in him to do that role with consistency, and that I don't know that his gadget role in the offense is carved out enough to solidify a roster spot for him. But one of the conversations got into the splash plays at that position, and I so much don't care necessarily about splash plays. When you look league-wide, not a lot of guys, the kicking game has gone away, especially returns. Returns has gone away quite a bit. We had an all-pro in Andre Robertson, and that was great. But nobody that's on this Bills roster is going to give you the type of production consistently that we saw from Andre Roberts. So I expect maybe a little bit of a dip in the returns and the explosives on returns. But in terms of touchdowns, people are talking to me oh, what about a McCole Hardman? He had 1 punt return touchdown. The leader in punt return touchdowns in the NFL last year was 1.
Cordarrelle Patterson had a year or two where he had 2. There's no Dante Hall right now. There's no Devin Hester right now.
Right.
That there isn't anybody in the league that's doing that right now. There's no guy who's breaking off 6 touchdowns in a season. That just doesn't that doesn't even really happen anymore.
No, and that was Nate Burleson when they were talking about Josh needed to take another step forward from Kyle Brandt said, and then Nate Burleson said their special teams needs to come come up with more explosive plays. And it's like this isn't that league. Like you're not going to have guys that are going to start running back 2 to 3 touchdowns a year in punt returns. I just don't see the league trending that way. And there's not a lot of improvement. Somebody asked what was the DVOA last year. I forget exactly where the Bills were.
They got weighted. They got into top 10.
They got in the top. I think weighted they were in the top 5, and I think regular they were like 6th for the year. But there was a point where they were top 2 in the league, and that was consistency from Andre Robertson returns, but it was also consistency in their ability to field punts and things like that with those gunners. So I think
we had those handful of games where Corey Bojorquez would have 1 punt for 64 yards and stuff like that. When that was that really skews when the sample size is 1, but the average is 64 with no return.
Great punt and a good coverage on top of it. So I think this is becoming a consistent unit. I think we're getting away a little bit from the days of this being a unit that was sloppy and letting up big plays with consistency. I think you're seeing more consistency throughout this unit. And I think that allowing Bojorquez to go somewhere else and bringing in a guy that has throughout his career so far been more consistent at his job goes to show you that that's what they're looking for right now is consistency. And I think that's why I think they have confidence that Isaiah McKenzie can make some splash plays when he gets the ball in his hand and in the punt game. But I think the reason they brought in competition was that he's never been able to have consistency at this job, and that he is a little bit loose with the ball, and he hasn't been able to hold on to the ball. And these are things that you can't have. You can't have a punt returner put the ball on the ground. Like that's the type of backwards explosive toxic differential plays that you can't deal with. So I think this is going to be an interesting battle. But I agree with you. I think right now, if I had to guess, I think Stevenson has the hand up in the fact that he's draft asset. They put an asset into him. He's got super cheap contract control. Yes. Isaiah McKenzie's contract means nothing to Brandon Beane. He can walk away from that tomorrow and not lose a wink of sleep. Yeah. And so I think a lot of fans like McKenzie. He's got a nice personality. He's made some great plays. I like the gadget role he's carved out for himself, but he's got a battle this summer. This guy has to bring it to really earn his spot.
Yeah, and, obviously we've talked about before, Stevenson is bigger. He's faster. McKenzie is more quick than fast. He's not, crazy fast. He's more quick than fast. Sure. Stevenson is fast and quick, and he's bigger, and he can do some of those gadgety type things as well. So, we'll see.
People have said to me, well, McKenzie, teams would clamor to have McKenzie. Well, they had a shot. He was sitting there, and he didn't re-sign with the Bills for a lot of money. He could have gone to a number of teams. Teams weren't clamoring for him just 3 months ago. So
multiple days into free agency and came back for the minimum. If any team offered more than 1 year or more than the minimum, he would have taken it. Now, maybe other teams also offered the minimum, and he came back to Buffalo and said, hey, I'm not going to go take the same money for a different place. I want to come back here. But if anybody offered more money or multiple years, he would have taken it, and nobody offered that.
Yeah.
So that kind of wraps it up here, and it's exciting to be able to see we are officially back to football. I am very excited to be able to go and see it in person this Saturday and going to be able to report on that for you guys. Lots of tweets, lots of pictures. Well, tell us a little bit about it. You're not only going to miss me, you're going to miss society as a whole.
Yeah, I'm going to miss the next 2 weeks. I go home to Maine. I'm a Mainer, and we have a nice little camp, and we go up to Maine. And this year we're doing 2 weeks because we didn't get to travel anywhere because of COVID. So my wife had a bunch of extra time off, and you got to use it or lose it. So yeah, it's going to be nice. Although we always do it this time of year, and it's always that first preseason game falls under it, and I'll get to watch it, but I won't get to watch it live because it's during vacation. The internet's a little spotty out there. My father-in-law told me the internet was better this year, so you might see me. I might make an appearance on the show if the internet's decent out from camp. But I'm going to try to kick back and enjoy. But you'll see me on Twitter still and enjoying that football's back. But you're going to hold down the fort here for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I've got 2 possible guests lined up, still kind of nailing those down, but excited to be able to have somebody come in and try to pinch hit and carry the weight for our man Aaron here, but some well-deserved time off to be able to go away with your family and enjoy it here. If you guys are heading out to the training camp practice on this Saturday, shoot me a message on Twitter. Let me know. I want to try to meet up with people and say hi to everybody while I'm out there. I'm going to certainly stop at Bar Bill afterwards and get myself some wings. Really looking forward to it there, but this has been awesome. It's been a lot of fun to go through this entire position preview series. We've walked you through every single spot in the entire roster to be able to get you ready, and now we are back. We're going to be talking about the storylines and the news coming up from training camp. We're going to be talking about reactions to the preseason games, letting you guys know what we see, who's making a name for themselves, who's making it hard to be able to, get themselves, off the roster, who makes themselves a cut down day trade candidate for Brandon Beane, all the different things there. Make sure you're checking out our sponsors over at Uncle Jumbo's. All kinds of good stuff there that they're selling all throughout Western New York and breaking out in other states. They're in Michigan. They're coming down into Florida. All kinds of exciting things.
They got a spot opening off of Elmwood.
Yes. They're going to be open up a tap house, I think it's called. Yeah. So really excited to see what they have going on there. Should be a lot of fun. And check out our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code COVER1. Get yourself $25 free to check out everything they have going on there. I think it's a lot more enjoyable experience than some of the bigger places like DraftKings and FanDuel. These guys do it where you're able to go in and draft with one confined league. You don't have to worry about somebody submitting an algorithm and 250 lineups. You just get to go against 12 other people and have some fun with it, or 3 other people just with your friends. Be able to have some fun going that way. But Aaron, before the people see you head off to vacation, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Aaron Quinton 716 on Twitter, and also make sure we got 5 nights of shows every day, and people are grinding, man. And this isn't just to the Cover One crew. Shout out to all the people that this isn't your main job in making content, but you're doing it anyway. It's been a grind here for the past month, 2 months here, 3 months of making content. Now we got football back. So shout out to all the other content creators. But yeah, 5 shows every night of the week. We've got you covered here at Cover One. And once the season ramps up, you'll also get our obviously post-game show. So that's 6 shows a week at Cover One. And we're doing it all for you guys, and we can't do it without you. So all the support that you've shown us and the other shows, super appreciative, and I can't wait to talk about real football and real practice and stuff here going forward, and no more positional previews. We're on to 2021, man.
Absolutely. You can come find me at Greg Thompson, having a good time, always going back and forth with Bills fans. You can find me in the Cover One Slack channel, having fun over there. Sign up for our premium membership, all kinds of awesome coverage. Check out everything we have going on. But on behalf of Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Thompson. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.